Right, let's make a start. Maybe if I can just get a thumbs up if the sound is coming through okay. Good, thank you very much. And welcome to this panel session on the energy network of the future, solutions for reaching net zero. Or put another way, how do we build the power grids we're going to need for net zero whilst keeping the lights on and keeping bills down. So my name's Simon Verley, and I'm the head of energy at KPMG. I'm your host for this panel. We've got a fantastic lineup of speakers. I'm going to ask each of them in turn just to introduce themselves, their organisations, and just give us some initial thoughts on this topic. Then I'll have a bit of Q&A with the panellists, and then over to you. We'll put our headphones on along with you. We can all tell the colour of the headphones, so if you're listening to the other panel, I'm afraid you'll reveal yourself. So please stay tuned. Please stay tuned to this one. I'm told there's no break between panels, so we'll be wrapping up, I think, when I get the nod at 12 or shortly after. So let's get started. Maybe if I can ask Fintan to introduce yourself.
Good afternoon, my name is Fintan Sly. I'm Chief Executive at the National Energy System Operator. We're sort of the newly formed organisation in October last year. Just in terms of future power grids, I think maybe make two quick comments at the start, Simon. The first is we are moving towards thinking more strategically about how they're developed, and one of the key elements in that is the development of a strategic spatial energy plan, which we're currently working on, which will look out into 2040, 2050 at what are the big ticket items that we need and where spatially will they be placed around GB, and this will allow us to develop out detailed network plans, detailed plans for generation as we go forward. So that is one of the key things that we're doing. The other key enabler that we're involved in at the moment is the reform of the connection process. So at the moment there's about 800 gigawatts of generation queuing up to get on to the system in a first come first served mechanism. We're completely reforming that such that by the end of the year we're going to have a system that is those projects that are strategically needed in the country, that are ready to go, will get connection offers that enable them to get on to the system quicker. So there are, I think, the two big things, Simon, that I would point out, and happy to talk further about them as we go through the panel.
Great, thanks very much, Fintan. I'm sure we're going to return to both strategic planning and the role of connections reform. Lucy, over to you.
Thanks very much, Simon. So I'm Lucy Yu. I'm Chief Executive at Centre for Net Zero, which is a open energy and AI research institute forecasting the future of energy demand using AI and international field trials. I think just a couple of points to add to Fintan's really. One is that the future grid will need to be much more flexible than the grid that we have today. We will need not just to have levers that enable us to modify the supply side or adjust the supply side, but we also need to focus very much on the demand side. So shifting demand to periods of renewable generation in order to reach a fully sustainable grid of the future. In order to do that, we will need to have a lot more intelligence in that grid. So we will need to make much more use of digital and data in the system, because that will be the effectively the kind of the wiring and the piping that will enable us to behave in this flexible way. And probably just really quickly, finally, I'll just say this type of grid will also save us a lot of money. So we can't achieve a grid of the future, clean energy system, just by building more infrastructure. We also need to change the way that we operate that grid. And using these concepts, these flexible concepts, will mean that we don't need to build as much infrastructure as we might otherwise need to do so.
Great, thanks very much, Lucy. I'm sure we're going to come back to flexibility and also the role of AI, a double-edged sword for the power system, so I'm sure we'll be debating that. Ian.
Thanks very much, and morning everybody. I'm Ian Brown. I head the investment activities at the National Wealth Fund. The National Wealth Fund is the government's principal net zero investor. That's the easiest way to think of us. So our role is to find where financing is getting a little bit stuck, unlock issues, and hopefully crowd in quite a lot of private sector financing on the way to make things happen that otherwise wouldn't happen if we weren't involved. As a financier, maybe just talk, Simon, about two things we're doing at the moment. One specifically to do with grid, and maybe then a little bit about storage. Some of you may have seen that we announced back in April, I think, a financing for Iberdrola, where we're providing £600 million financing alongside a syndicate of banks to help with unlocking some of the congestion up particularly on the boundary between England and Scotland. The Eastern Green Link in particular I'm thinking about, which is an interconnector which moves, or will move, the power that's been generated, particularly the wind farms, get it down, bypassing the congested areas and moving that into the northeast of England and Norfolk. You might ask why we did that. The answer being that the amount of money that the transmission operators need over the next 10 years or so is absolutely enormous. And they're starting to tap out various markets already. And so we've come in with something that is more flexible than the bond market, much longer maturity than the bank market, and helping to defray some of the issues that they have with raising finance. Very briefly on storage, obviously if we're going to have all this power generation, it's got to move through the grid. Having storage on the grid is also vital, and the more power we have, the more storage we're going to need. We've done a number of things in short duration storage, providing debt to developers, putting lithium-ion batteries on the grid. We've done some medium duration equity investment, and we've also done a liquid air energy storage, very long duration investment. So no doubt, Simon, we'll come back and talk about some of those in a minute.
Great, thanks very much, Ian. Jonathan.
So hello everyone, I'm Jonathan Brearley, CEO of Ofgem. People may not know this, I used to work for Simon a long time ago, so this feels a bit like a Director General update in Department of Energy and Climate Change about 15 years ago, where I had this idea we might want to reform the market, Simon. I don't know what you thought of it, but I think it's worked out okay. So look, I thought I would just paint a bit of a picture as to where we are with this programme as a whole. So I saw Chris Stark on the stage there talking about 2030, and look, we're a year in, really, to that programme. I think this year has principally been spent trying to figure out, with the help of Fintan and his team, how we're going to make this transition and how we're going to make sense of this transition, how we're going to make sure this transition works for customers. But for us now, we really are moving into a phase which is all about delivery. So I was delighted to see the progress that DESNZ has made through the spending review. We have a lot of infrastructure spending going into this sector. Ofgem's role, principally around networks, is making sure that we build the infrastructure at the pace we need. And next week we will be announcing our kind of next stage price controls. Now, price controls a few years ago were a fairly technical and not very exciting event. I think now they are going to be at the heart of the transition that we're attempting to go on. Because in anybody's world, we will need a lot of new transmission infrastructure, and we need to make sure that that's built efficiently, on time and on budget. So one thing we are saying really clearly to all network companies is, look, there is a very big sort of leap of faith we are making with customers to give you the funding you need, but we need to make sure that that delivers for people. And my strong view is we are on an enormously important transition. I've worked on climate change issues for 20 years, so of course I support that. I also think this transition is in the UK's economic and security interest right now. So we have a chance to go to an amazing place, but we'll all need to work hard to get there. And the last thing I would say, just to pick up on what Lucy said, this is not all about building big stuff, it's about making sense of the system that's there. So we are going to have to work hard together to make sure that we're not wasting electricity, that we're not doing things that leave customers with a bigger bill than otherwise would be. And I think there's a long road to go on that, and we look forward to working with you on all of that. So thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. I'm sure the audience will love to hear the outline of the DDs, the draft determinations, if you're willing to share that.
All 1,000 pages.
Sophie.
Thank you, Simon. Good afternoon, everybody. Is it already afternoon or is it still the morning? I lost track of time. I'm Sophie Oliphant. I am the Managing Director of 3M. So you wonder why I'm here next to National Grid and Ofgem. I run the risk of promoting my company, but that's really not why I'm here. I'm hoping that I'll make a case for how innovation and technology is going to make the transition more affordable, the energy transmission more efficient, and how we can move to the next phase by actually engaging and realizing industries who are at the leading edge of innovation. So UK, as you know, is already at a leading edge in this transition to net zero, and so far the targets have been met, but the next decade becomes more challenging because our electricity consumption is actually going to double or maybe even triple. So we have a big challenge ahead of us. We are in front of the momentous decision and transition. But I think pulling together, we have plenty of tools in the toolbox that we can put to work and make this happen for this country. Thank you.
Thank you very much, all of you. So I'm going to just kick off with some Q&A and then over to you in the audience. I'm hoping this is going to work with all the technology, but we'll start with just some Q&A. Can I start with the issue of affordability? Sophie, you just mentioned it there, but Jonathan, I'm wondering if I can come to you just to talk about how much is all this going to cost? We've got this incredible, unprecedented build-out of power grids. Obviously, it's got to reduce some of the constraints, we hope, on the system, which I know, Fintan, you've been very concerned about at NESO, and you will be as well at Ofgem. But how much is it all going to cost, Jonathan, in terms of this build-out for consumers?
So look, I mean, in aggregate terms, we are putting tens of billions of pounds into this system, so that will find its way through to network charges. But I think what you get for that is really three things. So first of all, you get reduction in constraint costs. That's really important because otherwise, as I say, we have a system where electricity is being generated but not used. Secondly, you get overall in this change, you get a reduction in the wholesale price because every time wind generates or solar generates, then we're not letting gas set that marginal price. But really for me, it's the third benefit which is the most important, which is we diversify away from our reliance on gas. So one of the tests that I'm going to apply to what we say next week is imagine if we had a Russia-Ukraine situation in 2030. What does this system that we're building look like and how well does it cope with that? And look, having been the person that had to tell the country they might get bills of £3,500 or even more, which is 2 to 3 times the average bill in this country, I don't think it's reasonable for us ever to be back in that place. So this is not just an investment in net zero, it's more importantly an investment in our economic and secure future.
Thanks very much. Fintan, do you want to come in on the question of affordability, but also strategic planning? You mentioned strategic planning in your introductory remarks. Just give us a bit more on what difference that can make.
Yeah, I mean, maybe just to pick up on Jonathan's point first. So when we looked at 2030 and what it would take to get to a clean power system, and we looked at sort of what were the costs, yes, there is a very large capital cost in it, but this is in energy infrastructure, which gets depreciated and paid for over decades. And what you're effectively doing is replacing burning fossil fuels with capital investment over the long term. And what we saw was that the system costs did not rise. One traded off against the other. What you need to do, though, is make sure that you build out the flexibility to operate that in a way that drives down prices for consumers, which, you know, Jonathan talked about constraints, Lucy talked about flexibility. Our plan had a massive increase in demand-side flexibility and consumer participation, and I think that is one of the things that there really needs to be a focus on over the next while. It's not building big, huge new things. It's actually about changing how our market structures work and how consumers interact with the energy system. We need to remember that the energy system doesn't exist to serve itself. It exists to serve society and the economy. We need to find a way that we can enable that flexibility a lot more. I think strategic energy planning enables us to set the framework for the long term such that we are putting in place all of the key bits, because investment does take a long time. These are assets that you can't build or can't put in place overnight. So from a GB perspective, we need to make sure that we are setting up the system in the right way, and then we need to make sure that we actually operated and ensure that we get the demand flexibility in place, that we get systems that can utilize the storage. Like, it only works, and it only works for consumers when you can bring all of those bits together and get a system that works for society and the economy.
Lucy, do you want to come back in on the flexibility point, given Fintan's mentioned it, and just say how much difference can it make in practice?
Yeah, I think a very big difference. I think this is an area of massive untapped potential. So one of the important things here is that in an energy system in which you have much more supply coming from variable renewable, the price of electricity should be a function not just of the time, but also of the place. And so, for instance, if you have a very, very sunny period and you're generating a lot of renewable, then actually that can be very cheap electricity. And as Fintan was saying, that cheap cost could be passed on to consumers and should be passed on to consumers. And we have shown that this can be used in a very consumer-friendly way. We just published, just a couple of weeks ago, some research that we ran at Centre for Net Zero, where we had 110,000 electric vehicle drivers. We ran this research as a randomised control trial, so that just means we had a control group. We did this in a very scientifically rigorous way. And we use the public EV charging network. So not everybody has their own private driveway, so not everybody's able to have their own private charger. If you are using the public charging network, at the moment you will be paying higher prices than people who are able to have their own charge point. What we did in this trial was we dropped the price of charging in certain times and locations in which renewable generation was more abundant. So we are simulating effectively what will happen on our system when we have more and more renewable generation. Firstly, we demonstrated that we did increase demand at those particular charge points when we did that, and we increased it quite significantly. So we can soak up that lower cost renewable energy when it is generated. But we also showed that actually if we scaled this, so if we sort of repeated this across the country and scaled this as a concept, that actually people who have electric vehicles would be able to charge them on parity with the cost of having a petrol vehicle. So, that's the first kind of point, is like get to the point where you can compete on having a petrol vehicle, and then obviously over time you can get that cost down further. So we can pass these cost savings on to consumers. I think we do need more awareness of these kinds of things with consumers, though. Someone told me recently, I forget which country, I think it was one of the Nordic countries, it might have been Norway, but don't quote me on that. But they told me of a country where actually just on the national weather forecast, the weather forecaster will say, it's a sunny day today, please think about charging your electric vehicle in the middle of the day because it's going to be more affordable. And they have a slightly different market structure to us. I'm sure you may have followed some of the conversations about the electricity market reform discussions in the UK. But we do need a market structure that will, in a more granular way, reflect that true cost of electricity in place and time.
I'm sensing this panel could slip into a debate on zonal pricing, but I'm going to just steer us away from that for a moment. Sophie, you talked very positively about the role of innovation and emerging technologies. Do you want to say a bit more about what difference you think they can make?
Yes, I will give a couple examples. So 3M actually is a material science company. So we have 100,000 patents, and we continue to develop new materials, and we have a strong play in energy, renewables. And one example could be, so the capital investment to update the grid is going to be significant in order to pass more electricity, transmit more electricity. So, for instance, the new type of materials used for transmission cables, an example would be the aluminum conductor composite cables, which operate at high temperature, have low sag, have low noise, and I believe National Grid has already utilized it in some stretches. That is a play at productivity. And that will, coupled with sensor data, cable accessories, can transmit real-time data about the functioning of the grid, the power outages, to avoid really long-term outages and improve the efficiency of the grid. So these are just some of the examples, but there are many, many other innovations out there that can actually improve the productivity. Renewables, for instance, wind blades on turbines, they can be covered with special composite films that would protect it from weather, from wind, and extend the life cycle of the turbine. So there are a lot of elements of productivity there that can be explored with various industries. So we need to absolutely collaborate with science, technology, the universities to explore these nuggets of technology and innovation that can improve the productivity and cost and lifetime of our assets.
Thanks, Sophie. Does anybody else want to come in on this innovation point? Because we need innovation to get costs down. Obviously, AI can help with some of that, but clearly AI is also going to add to power demand, so it's a bit of a double-edged sword for the power system. Are you optimistic, Vincent?
On AI, I'm an optimist anyway, right? So I think AI will be transformative in how we think about the energy system. If you think about what we've been talking about here, the levels of complexity of the system are rising exponentially as we sort of transition it. And AI provides a way to actually leverage that distributed system in a way that can drive out value. So I think AI will be hugely transformative. On innovation, I think there's probably two bits. There's the sort of innovation in technology and using HTLS or high temperature low sag conductors, dynamic line rating, all of those new technologies that can get more out of big assets. But the other one I think is digital innovation. So how can we innovate in a way that helps consumers interact with and get some of the benefits out of the system? And largely the industry has been to some extent untouched by it. Whereas if you look at other industries, they've been massively disrupted by it. And I think that is a space that is ripe for AI and innovation. Like, how do you disrupt the basic model to unlock that consumer value through a lot of the things that Lucy was talking about here, but really, unlocking that to get the benefits for consumers.
Anybody else? Jonathan, do you want to come in on this?
Well, just to add, I think both Lucy and Vincent have talked about all the technologies out there. The one thing I would love to see, coming back to the things that you described, is some of this British innovation being scaled up here, built here, and exported to other countries. And one thing I know, you'll know this for the amount I bang on to the National Wealth Fund about it, in 10 years' time, we can take the innovation that we're genuinely driving and turn that into products and services we offer other countries. I think we deliver not only on net zero, but on some of that growth we promised even back in 2006, 2007.
Ian, do you want to come in?
Yeah, can I just pick up on that? One of the roles of the National Wealth Fund is to take risk that other financiers, other lenders won't take. And so we find ourselves looking at a lot of relatively early stage technology companies that are trying to bring new products, new approaches onto the grid. And I talked a little bit in the introduction about different technologies for storage, whether it might be vanadium flow or liquid air or finding ways to make lithium ion just last much longer. But we also look at other things as well. Can we find ways of operating transformers more cheaply, more quickly, keeping them cooler, and various other things. But one of the things that I think is holding the country back a little bit is, I'm sitting here with best part of £28 billion to try to push forward these various technological changes, but that's a drop in the ocean. You heard the numbers that Jonathan mentioned that is needed every single year to move the country forward, and I would just like to see a little bit more of the market, whether that's institutional investors, pension funds, banks, just coming a little bit nearer to what we and the British Business Bank and various other parts of government are trying to do, because it's just not possible, and I don't think it's reasonable to expect government, which by the way means us, government gets its money from taxpayers, it's not reasonable to expect government to do everything, to take all of the risk. I'm very happy we take a chunk of risk out, but I do need some of the institutional investors to come and help, and I'm sure we'll get onto it later on, but when I'm asking them to come and help, I'm not asking them to take ridiculous risk, I'm not asking them to do it without the return. These are investment opportunities which I think are just sitting there and going missing.
And Ian, can you help with a question I get asked by my clients a lot, which is just explain the difference between what you're doing at the National Wealth Fund and what GB Energy is doing?
Yeah, sure. So think of GB Energy, so their focus is very much clean energy, whereas for the National Wealth Fund, we have a much broader mandate now. Clean energy is a part of it, but as you'll have seen in various recent announcements, we're being asked by the Chancellor to lean into a much broader support of the industrial strategy. And we're no longer just doing infrastructure, we have a much broader mandate. So GB, quite a narrow mandate, ours much broader. They are a developer. So the idea is, or they will become a developer as they become more mature, so they will be helping to bring assets to life. We're a financier. So typically, particularly as they get more mature and are able to invest earlier stage, they will be investing first. Think of us as the financier coming along later on, maybe pre-FID, maybe post-FID, but we will generally be a little bit later than them. They will be doing earlier stage DevEx than us, we'll do some DevEx later on. So that's really the split. We're slightly later stage than them, and their focus is development, not really the financing side. Obviously, if you're a developer, you put money in, but their focus is development, not pure financing.
Right, I'm going to open it up for questions from the audience. If anybody's got a question, please do stick up your hand. I've got lots more questions I can ask the panel. We can carry on, but if there is a question, then do... Lady there. Don't know how we... Thank you.
Hi, thank you all for a brilliant panel. I'm Anne Simmel from strategy consultancy Bain & Company, and the elephant in the room is what happens to the gas network of the future in a net zero world. We've talked a lot about decoupling our dependence on gas, but could you speak a little bit about maybe what gives you hope, but also what are the biggest challenges as we wind that down?
Great question. I'm going to go to Jonathan because you're dealing with that issue now.
I think we're wrestling with that right now, and clearly in a world where we transition a lot of our use away from gas to electricity, there are questions around how the gas grid will evolve to support that. One thing I would say is, look, we are still at quite a large point of uncertainty as to that final destination, so there's a lot of work for us to do with the department to make sure we're clear not only where we end up, but how that might evolve and over what time frame. And secondly, look, I've been doing this kind of job in this kind of sector for 20 years, and every decade I've been surprised about the new technologies and the new uses that come forward. So whatever that plan is, that plan needs to be adaptive. So I think for the gas networks, my encouragement to them is make sure they are doing their own work to innovate and to think about not only what different forms of low carbon gas might be used, but also how else might you use their assets. And then over time, at some point, we may have to have a conversation about the economics of the gas grid and how those change if fewer and fewer people use it. I'd say right now, we've had a conversation with the sector about something called accelerated depreciation, where we might begin paying some of it soon. I think, not unreasonably, we are hearing pushback from the sector who say, look, actually, given all that uncertainty, maybe that's too early. And that's what we'll be thinking about, and that's what we're going for determinations next week. But for me, it is the biggest question after transport, which is how we're going to heat and how we're going to genuinely support the industry we need. I think, I'm not trying to get out of jail here, but that's a government question principally that we'll support them on.
Any other hands in the audience? If not, sorry, yes, lady there. Oh, sorry. No? Okay, let's come back. Fintan, we saw the power cuts in Spain. Sorry, we saw the power cuts in Spain and Portugal recently. We've had the initial report from the Spanish authorities about that. Is there anything you're taking away from what that initial report's saying about how you manage security of supply in renewable-dominated power systems?
So I think the first thing is there's still an awful lot of unanswered questions about what happened in Spain and Portugal. I think what we do know is it was largely a voltage event rather than a frequency event, and it happened over a really short period of time that the system got away from them effectively. I think the sequence of events leading up to it are still pretty unclear from everything I've seen, so we do need to see more about that. I think the good thing that we take away from it is that the type of things that they experienced around voltage control, inertia, stability, all of those things we have in place here and have been looking at for quite a long time. So we are, I mean, the key thing we're doing is trying to make sure that anything that happened on the Spanish grid, we understand as much as we can and we can learn from it. And what does that mean for how we think about the system here? But we have in the UK actually developed a set of markets around voltage control and reactive power and inertia and stability that are separate from the markets for generation and are specific. And therefore, I think we feel that we're in a better position to actively manage those things and control them. But like, there's no complacency, Simon. I think you saw the scale of impact on the two countries when the grid did go down. So there's absolutely no complacency, and it just shows how complex running modern day power grids are. But I think it's too early to say this is the specific thing that caused it. I think that's still a little bit murky, to be honest.
Let's turn to the issue of public engagement. We published some research recently on community benefits, which showed that for a significant chunk of the population, I'm afraid no amount of money off the energy bills is going to persuade them to have transmission lines anywhere near their home. I don't know if there's a view from the panel. I don't know if, Jonathan, you've got a view about how do we get the public on side for the build-out? And Lucy, you might want to comment on, we may not need to build all these grids because we can do more on flexibility. So, how much can we get the public on side through direct engagement? But Jonathan, do you want to kick us off?
So look, I think there's kind of three dimensions to that. I do think there is a continued public debate about the transition we're on. There's a different political debate than there has been historically, so there is more challenge out there. And the first thing I say is, look, for us as a regulator and for the industry, that means we need to keep our eyes firmly on what customers need and making sure that that is being delivered. So there's a big job for us to do to make sure that in the context of the change we're under, things are value for money, they're easy to use, and that retail part of the sector, which is not so much of a focus from a net zero perspective, is actually delivering for customers in really basic ways, looking after customers who are vulnerable, making sure that services are effective, making sure that people, when they have problems, get those problems solved. And I can't overstate how much that is going to be fundamental in the next few years. But when it comes to infrastructure and infrastructure locally, look, I was brought up in a beautiful part of the southwest of England. I know how strongly I would feel, or how strongly communities feel when they see infrastructure coming through their areas. But my observation is different companies have done this differently. And as we see these projects evolve, that level of actually talking in detail to communities about why this thing is needed, what it's trying to do, and then adapting as far as you can to make this as least challenging as possible to those communities is incredibly important. And the role I think community benefits has in this is not just saying, well, I'm going to give you a bit off your bill, therefore you'll be happy, but it's acknowledging that people are giving something up by having this infrastructure in their area, and particularly when it gets focused on sort of interventions that improve life for the community, it also means you're giving back something to a group as well as to individuals. So in my mind, it's not a silver bullet. You can't pretend when you're building transmission it doesn't have an impact on people's lives. It does. But doing that carefully, doing that sensitively, and acknowledging to people that there's a big change coming and respecting that, I think is going to be a big part of getting this done.
Did you want to come in?
Yeah, maybe just to build on what Jonathan said. I mean, I think community benefits, it's necessary but not sufficient, right? I mean, the development of infrastructure is an imposition on individuals and community. You need to recognise that. But I think the other piece I think that helps is if you set it in context. So this concept that we'll have both a strategic spatial energy plan, but also regional plans that are developed with the communities as well, will help to get that buy-in from the start. Because I think sometimes the conversation only happens at a really late stage, where it's a conversation about does the pylon go in this field or in this field, whereas the community actually want the conversation about, well, why do you need to build anything at all? And if you're building something, why can't it be underground? And so you need to find a way, and I think the structures that have been put in place around both national and regional strategic planning help to do that. And just to what Jonathan said, there are great examples out there of companies that have done this really, really well. And I think finding a way to find and leverage that best practice and spread that around, I think is really, because it is a huge infrastructure program we're looking at, and we need to find a way to bring people with us.
And Lucy, on the demand side, is this, how can we get that greater engagement through more active participation in our energy market?
I think. So I think one of the things is actually just raising awareness of some of the types of things that I've talked about that we've looked at in our field trials at Centre for Net Zero. Being very customer centric in terms of how we sort of communicate these things. I think sort of just reflecting on the conversation about sort of public engagement and public acceptance, because that links to what we're discussing. I think, as Fintan said, context is very important, and I think people really understanding why is this relevant for me and what's in this for me. We have one of the other pieces of analysis we've done. We're now running a full field trial on this as well, just to confirm the previous analysis. The field trial will be a little bit more rigorous, but the previous analysis we looked at is a scheme in which Octopus Energy fitted free rooftop solar and home battery into the homes of low-income customers. And we did some analysis of that. We wanted to see if there was a genuine impact on their bill, and so if there was an impact on the amount of energy that they were importing from the grid. Now you might think, of course, that would be reduced because they're going to be generating and storing some of their own energy. But of course, with these lower income customers, actually sometimes they might not be using as much energy as they would like in the first place because they can't afford to. So this is sort of like sometimes called the rebound effect. So we wanted to confirm whether we observed that or not. And in this analysis, we did find that those customers were importing significantly less energy from the grid. I think it was about 40% less over the period that we studied. And during the summer months, they were actually net exporters back to the grid. So this had a very meaningful impact on their bills. And I think that's the kind of thing that when we talk to real customers, we talk to real people about that, they are able to sort of, they can see the benefits within their community. And I'm sure Ian talked a little bit about GB Energy and how National Wealth Fund is different. I'm sure GB Energy have seen analogous support when they have talked about things like rooftop solar for schools, for instance. I think people, when they can see the direct benefit from these sorts of schemes within their communities, and it's not as abstracted as just appearing to be lots of new infrastructure in sort of parts of the countryside and things, that there is more support. So this is, I think, a more nuanced conversation, and context is very important. But these types of things also then, I think, encourage others to make investigations, to inquire, to think about things like, actually, if I did install these technologies in my home, actually, I'd get my bills down, but then maybe if I come to sell my home in the future, I might also sell my home for more money as well, because somebody else will see the value of those installed technologies.
That's great, Lucy, thank you. I'm going to just check in the audience again if there's any hands. I can see a hand at the back there. The gentleman got there first. Thank you very much. Will you just say who you are?
Hello. It's not on.
No, it is. We can hear you.
Is it on?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. I can't hear it. Sorry. Simon, thank you. Philip Selwood. I'm director at the Renewable Energy Association. I just wanted to ask an adjacent question about the role of skills. I listened to Chris Stark earlier, who reeled off a huge list of what was announced yesterday in the industrial strategy: nuclear, onshore wind, transport initiatives, a whole host of stuff, let alone CCUS and hydrogen. What do we need to do in order to bring forward I think it might even been Simon's organisation that said that 420,000 new engineers are needed between now and 2030. Firstly, where are they, and how are we going to encourage them to come with us on this energy transition?
No, it's a great question, Philip. and there was some significant announcements yesterday, the industrial strategy. We don't have DBT on this panel, but I don't know if anybody wants to chip in with thoughts. Jonathan, do you want to go?
Well, I mean, I think you're right to identify this challenge, because this isn't just about energy. We're building out the water sector. We're doing a whole lot more across the economy. But look, I personally think this is also a massive opportunity. You know, these kinds of jobs are skilled jobs. They are well-paid jobs. And it's something that I think if we do this right and we get our training programs in place, then this will be a huge boost for the economy and a huge boost for a section of the economy that I know the government are worried about, particularly young people looking for new and more reliable work. Second thing I would say is look, you know, in a sense, if we get all of that in place, then I think we have a big offer globally. And I come back to my point that the more we can begin to think of this as a growth opportunity and make that real, then I think the better it will be, not only for the economy, but also for net zero transition.
So if you're in the supply chain, I know you're not solving the whole of the skills challenge, but do you want to say what you're doing in your company?
Yes, absolutely. I think the industry needs to play a big role attracting these future scientists, engineers, and really we have one of the best scientific bases in this country, and we need to attract more young people into STEM and science. We're doing our part to engage youth in STEM subjects, but there is a lot of research this country needs to lead with. So industrial strategy announced the fusion, for instance, fusion, hydrogen. These are big plays for the alternative energy sources, and there is a lot of innovation happening now, and that's where we need to have our future engineers engaged in and future scientists engaged in, because we can make a breakthrough. But I think our net zero journey is very much dependent on identifying better sources of energy like hydrogen. You know, fusion is maybe a long bet, but it's a significant undertaking in science and innovation.
Anybody else want to come in on this skills point?
Just to say, I mean, like Jonathan, I think it's a huge opportunity, and like the supply chain one as well, I think the key is that we capture that benefit in Britain, right? What we don't want is to be, those pounds, that money going abroad. So how do we capture the supply chain, the skills, the jobs in Britain, and make sure that it actually crystallizes as an opportunity in reality?
Thank you. There were some other hands that went up. Gentleman here at the front.
Yes, I am Erdem Girgin, working for HVDC Business, and my question is related to blackouts in the UK. I just want to learn the UK strategy for bipole projects from Northern Africa to the UK, like extinct projects from Morocco to the UK, or any other projects maybe between Spain, new projects between Spain, Portugal and the UK. Thank you.
Finton, one for you maybe? I mean, Jonathan, I don't know if either of you want to comment on that?
I'm not going to comment on individual projects that are out there. I mean, I think the UK is a really well interconnected country, right? And I think if you look at the plans out to 2030 and beyond, there's significantly more levels of interconnection in there. So, and it is a hugely valuable and flexible asset to the system. So interconnectors are hugely valuable, and I think long distance interconnectors that just connect generation into the UK is probably a slightly different model and is a generation asset rather than an interconnection asset. But HVDC interconnectors the UK has gigawatts of them and is on track to build even more. So yeah, hugely positive.
Jonathan, do you want to come in?
All I'd add, ultimately, this is a departmental decision, projects like that. But two things people may or may not know. Simon knows I worked on a project looking at Iceland, for example, as a potential source of power. So my perspective is simple. This is still an incredibly challenging transition. We talk a lot about 2030, but 2030 is a milestone along the way. It's not the end destination. So we will be, and I'm sure government will be, open for new ideas about how we might make it. Fortunately, it's for them to decide project by project rather than Ofgem, but we'll obviously put everything we need to in place when they decide. But I think it's worth looking at.
Well done for being in HVDC at the moment. It's busy times, I bet. Any other questions? I think there was a lady there on the edge. Just.
Hello, my name is Luz. I'm coming from Missouri and Co., a trading commodities company. This question is for Fintan. What are the biggest barriers that NISO is facing at the moment, and how you are working with the different parties to overcome them?
The biggest challenges facing this year. Wow, you've got quite a priority list at the moment, Fintan. What's top of the worry list?
Yeah, I suppose you've short, medium, and long term in all this. So I think at the moment, from a GB energy industry perspective, I think reforming connections is absolutely one of the biggest things on our plate. That, you know, we have got the reform proposals approved by Ofgem. It's now an implementation sprint towards the end of the year. So that is definitely has to be done to unlock 2030. I think you have, how does the market develop? How do we get flexibility on? How do we tackle constraint costs? We recently published an estimate of constraint costs out to 2030 and beyond, and you know they peak at about £8 billion a year. So you know, how do we collectively as an industry get around tackling those sort of constraint costs and operating the system? And then I think the final one I add is just that transition to long-term strategic planning. How do we make sure that we do that in a way that is constructive and makes sure that we are putting in place all of the infrastructures? As Jonathan was pointed out, 2030 is just a milestone. We need to make sure that we set this up for success in the long term.
Very good, very clear. Thank you, Fintan. There was a lady just on the edge here had a question.
Hi, I'm Shivangi from First Impact Partners. We look at early stage climate tech VC. So I have a couple of questions. Just the first one I think is more for, I guess, Fintan as well, but maybe the broader panel. So I think in the Clean Power Plan for 2030, like you said, it was 40 billion that was required of private financing for grid expansions. What do you kind of see as the role of kind of PPPs as we, you know, need to expand, as we try and fulfill this kind of grid expansion need? And then maybe the second one is more for Ian. I think you mentioned the need for kind of institutional, additional private financing earlier in the process. I was at State of Climate Tech yesterday, and Barclays mentioned that they were kind of looking at debt financing now from kind of Series B onwards. Is that something that you've seen as well, and kind of where maybe NWF plays a low role in kind of providing mezzanine, and then maybe there's additional financing from other private banks? So sorry, two questions.
Should we do those in reverse order? And do you want to do the second one first?
Definitely, otherwise I'll forget what the question was, so that's helpful, thank you. Yeah, so one of the nice things about where I work is we have the most incredibly flexible capital. We can do debt, and we can do that senior, we can do it mezz, all sorts of flavors. We can provide equity, and we've also got a very effective guarantee which can help mitigate the risk that others might not be entirely comfortable taking. So we can go anywhere in the capital structure to bring other people in. I've seen some venture debt, which I think is what you're describing. Some venture debt offers around. I mean, they have their place. They're very expensive, but in many ways they should be, because they are taking incredible risk. But there are certainly a few players around who will provide that sort of financing. I think most companies generally, if they can, would prefer to have equity, which doesn't quite have the teeth that venture debt has, but that's not always available. And that's back to my point earlier on about we do need to see more institutional equity, particularly coming into the market. I shouldn't really give a plug for Barclays, but they do seem to be slightly more forward-footed than I think some of the other UK clearers, at least. I can't talk for the entire banking market. Certainly we've done a couple of transactions alongside them, both equity, no, so actually both of them equity transactions. So I'm not entirely surprised that they're doing this. It would be great if we could see more lenders prepared to come forward. I'm thinking about certainly the UK market at the moment, UK banking market. And I talk as someone who spent 30 years in that sector. It's never been so well capitalised, and I think the level of losses running now is very small. And sometimes losing money is just what you get as being a financier. So it's great to see them stepping forward. I'd just like to see other people stepping forward too.
Thanks, Ian. Vincent, did you want to comment on the first point?
Yeah, so really briefly, I think if you look at the 2030 Clean Power Advice, there are a range of different developments in there, from sort of regulated transmission all the way through to innovative demand-side response schemes to carbon capture and storage, etc. So I think there's opportunities in each of those for private capital to come in and play. The other piece that I would just say is, we are very supportive of opening up transmission to competition as well. So getting some private capital in there to build out transmission as well. There's probably a slightly longer term plan than 2030, but I think it could open up that market as well.
Well, I'm afraid we're going to have to wrap things up there. Thank you all for staying with us. I can see yellow on every headset in the audience, so thank you for staying with us. You've heard about the role of strategic planning, about the role of flexibility, the importance of demand-side response, different financing mechanisms, and the role of technology and innovation in the future of our power grid. So thanks everyone for joining us, and thank you to our excellent panel. Please show your appreciation.